With respect to Greece, I think that not only our G7 partners, but the IMF and other institutions that were represented here feel a sense of urgency in finding a path to resolve the situation there. And what it's going to require is Greece being serious about making some important reforms, not only to satisfy creditors, but more importantly, to create a platform whereby the Greek economy can start growing again and prosper. And so the Greeks are going to have to follow through and make some tough political choices that will be good for the long term. I also think it's going to be important for the international community and the international financial agencies to recognize the extraordinary challenges that Greece face. And if both sides are showing sufficient flexibility, then I think we can get this problem resolved. But it will require some tough decisions for all involved, and we will continue to consult with all the parties involved to try to encourage that kind of outcome.
Are you confident it'll happen before the deadline?
I think that everybody wants to make it happen, and they're working hard to get it done.
I'm Mitt Romney, and I approve this message.
Abraham Lincoln, JFK, Tupac, Biggie. Who is responsible for all of these murders? One man, Barack Obama. Where was Barack Obama during Normandy? Nowhere to be found. Do we really want another coward to lead us? Barack Obama wasn't at Normandy. Won't be there for you. Millions have died while on Barack Obama's watch. Of natural causes. Could you be next? Barack Obama. Have you seen him? I mean, he's black. Barack Obama. He's a man. Ladies, do we really want another man on top? Is your teenage daughter pregnant? Don't know who the father is? We do. It's Barack Obama. No wonder he wants healthcare so bad. Barack Obama screwed your daughter, will screw the country. Last time Barack Obama was in town, did he call you just to catch up? No. Obama doesn't care. Barack Obama. Damn.
Good morning. It is an honor for me to join this distinguished group of leaders from nations around the world. We come here in Copenhagen because climate change poses a grave and growing danger to our people. All of you would not be here unless you, like me, were convinced that this danger is real. This is not fiction, it is science. Unchecked, climate change will pose unacceptable risks to our security, our economies, and our planet. This much we know. The question then before us is no longer the nature of the challenge. The question is our capacity to meet it. For while the reality of climate change is not in doubt, I have to be honest, as the world watches us today, I think our ability to take collective action is in doubt right now. And it hangs in the balance. I believe we can act boldly and decisively in the face of a common threat. That's why I come here today, not to talk, but to act.
Subcommittee on Strategic Forces to order. This afternoon, we're here to discuss the Obama administration's deal with Iran, implications for missile defense and nonproliferation. We have testifying today a distinguished panel of witnesses. They are the Honorable Frank Klotz, Administrator, National Nuclear Security Administration, the Honorable Robert Scherer, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy Plans and Capabilities, the U.S. Department of Defense, Christopher Altmont, Senior Defense Intelligence Expert, Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, Middle East, Africa, Regional Center, Defense Intelligence Agency, Vice Admiral James Searing, Director of Missile Defense Agency, and Major General Stephen Shepro, is that correct? Vice Director of Strategic Plans and Policy, J5 Joint Staff. I want to note that the subcommittee invited a witness from the State Department to testify today. We were told in writing that he was available. He would be watching us even now from his office since his schedule was open. However, he's not here today. I understand that senior officials at the State Department decided not to send him because the department isn't ready to discuss implementation. Well, I think every member of this subcommittee should be angered by the disrespect which this membership and our witnesses have been treated by the State Department. Moreover, the entire Congress, as it prepares to vote on the Iran agreement, should be bothered that we are being asked to vote on this agreement and the Department of State won't discuss how it will be implemented. With that unpleasantness aside, I'll move to the joint hearing. In February of 2014, Undersecretary of State Wendy Sherman, a lead negotiator of the Iran agreement whose record reflects she also gave us the agreed framework with North Korea that gave the Kim family its nuclear weapons arsenal, stated in testimony before this House Foreign Affairs Committee that, quote, "It is true that in these first 6 months, we've not shut down all of their production of any ballistic missile that could have anything to do with delivery of a nuclear weapon. But that is indeed something that has to be addressed as a part of a comprehensive agreement," close quote. Let me repeat that, quote, "But that is indeed something that has to be addressed as a part of a comprehensive agreement," close quote. We all know what has happened to Iran, Russia, and China instead. In July, the President's senior military advisor, General Martin Dempsey, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified, quote, "Under no relieve pressure on Iran relative to ballistic missile capabilities and arms trafficking," close quote. I want to repeat that. Under no circumstances is what he said. Why is this important? As stated by your senior DOD leadership, the ban on technology for ballistic missiles was critical to America's own security, especially since Iran's ballistic missiles would be dangerous weapons if they were ever equipped with chemical, biological, or even nuclear warheads. Even if we assume the Iranians will honor the nuclear agreement, which we would be foolish to assume, we are paying no attention here to the chemical and biological weapons programs. Just this weekend, according to press reports, 45 Emirati soldiers fighting Iranian proxies in Yemen were killed by a ballistic missile with a conventional warhead. We don't have missile defense solely because the bad guys may have nuclear capability. I'll read an excerpt from the most recent Arms Control Compliance Report on Iran. Based on available information, the United States cannot certify whether Iran has met its chemical weapons production facility declaration obligations, destroyed its specialized chemical weapons equipment, transferred CW, chemical weapons, or retained an undeclared chemical weapons stockpile. The JCPOA, is that JPO? JCPOA ignores this violation and provides Iran more funding for chemical and biological weapons. Iran is also not in compliance with the Biological Weapons Convention, the ballistic missiles it needs to deliver them. I also want to indicate my strong agreement with the letter sent by Chairman Thornberry and House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes last week, which I will add to the record, that this agreement appears to have already started the cascade of proliferation in the Middle East. Unfortunately, I can't say much more in this environment, but I believe Secretary Kerry owes this body information before we vote. Chairman Thornberry and Chairman Nunes asked for a response by this past Tuesday, and that response has not been provided. I've stated before that I believe the administration concealed material information concerning Russia's violation of the INF Treaty from the United States Congress while the Senate was considering the New START Treaty in 2010. I've come to the same conclusion about this. I will cast my vote against the JCPOA, but I do not believe that the President will heed any call from this Congress about the legacy deal, about this legacy deal for him. We have a constitutional law professor as a president who seems to be unfamiliar with the Constitution's checks and balances. So we must all turn to cleaning up the mess that's being created and what's going to be required to fix it. I only hope that generations to come will not pay too high a price for the mistake of this president and what he's doing now. Before turning to the ranking member for any opening statements that he may make, I want to remind all my colleagues who attended this morning's classified session on Iran's malign activities, that was a highly classified briefing, and details from this morning should not be discussed in this open session. We will adjourn to a closed briefing at the conclusion of this open hearing, and at that appropriate venue, we can have discussion of those details. And with that, I turn to my friend and colleague from Tennessee, Mr. Cooper, for any opening statement that he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, welcome the witnesses, and I appreciate this opportunity to hear from them. Let me emphasize the word hear. This is called a hearing. It's not a press conference. We call it a hearing so that we can hear from the witnesses, which I look forward to doing. I would just urge the chairman and other colleagues who may come that we make this open portion as brief as possible so that we can get to the classified session, because I think that will be also much more useful as well as less risky in terms of what people around the world may hear. This is the third briefing on Iran today, and it is the only one to have an open portion. So with that, I would particularly urge my chairman and my colleagues to keep this open session as short as possible so that we can get to the classified session. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Concur with that view. General Klotz, we'll start with you for you to summarize your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, reached between the P5+1, the European Union, and Iran. Let me state right up front, the Department of Energy and the National Nuclear Security Administration value your robust support and abiding support for our mission and for our people. In that regard, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss a critical component of our overall mission, specifically our support to the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA. The IAEA, as you know, has a special responsibility in monitoring and verifying the nuclear-related measures detailed in the JCPOA. I've provided a written statement, and I respectfully request that it be submitted for the record. As Secretary of Energy Moniz has said, the JCPOA prevents Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, and it provides strong verification measures that would give us ample time to respond if Iran chooses to violate its terms. It is a very good deal for America, for our allies, and for our global security, and I fully share his view and this view. The Department of Energy and NNSA's nuclear experts, national laboratories, and nuclear security sites were extensively involved throughout the negotiations, evaluating and developing technical proposals in support of the U.S. delegation. As a result of their work, Secretary Moniz has said that he is confident that the technical underpinnings of the JCPOA are solid and that the Department stands ready to assist the IAEA in its implementation. Let me take a moment to discuss, as you requested, the Department's important work with the IAEA on nuclear safeguards. Safeguards are defined as the set of technical measures applied by the IAEA to independently and objectively verify that a state's nuclear material is accounted for and not diverted to nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosives. Safeguards also provide credible assurance of the absence of undeclared nuclear materials and activities. These technical measures include, for example, on-site inspection, nuclear material accountancy, physical measurements, facility design information verification, containment using tamper indicating tags and seals, surveillance including the use of cameras, and environmental sampling. DOE and NSA have closely cooperated with the IAEA's Department of Safeguards for many decades in developing and enhancing these measures. The full range of our involvement with the IAEA is actually described in this recently, just hot off the press, brochure prepared by the NNSA, and we have ample copies here for members and for staff if you choose to take one. Our work with the IAEA also includes funding, training, technology transfers, and expertise. In fact, since 1980, every new IAEA inspector has had nuclear materials measurement training at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. And every year, the department hosts additional specialized training courses for IAEA inspectors and analysts, both here and abroad. Our partnership with the IAEA has also generated various technologies for use in safeguard systems. For example, the Online Enrichment Monitor, the OLEM, is one example of the technology jointly developed by our national laboratories and the IAEA. The OLEM can continuously monitor the enrichment levels of uranium in gaseous forms at a centrifuge enrichment plant. And for the first time, as a result of this JCPOA, the OLEM will be used in Iran. Sir, I'd be very happy to provide any additional information on our involvement in response to any questions you may have, either in this open session or in the closing session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, General. Mr. Chair.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on missile defense and the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA. I'm grateful for this committee's consistent attention to and continuing support of the critical mission of our deployed forces, allies, and partners. I, too, have submitted written testimony for the record, so we'll look to keep these opening remarks relatively brief. I'd like to start by repeating what Secretary Carter has noted. the JCPOA places no limitations on the Department of Defense, no restrictions on our plans, programs, capabilities, or what we can do with our friends and allies. For decades, we have focused on and prioritized the totality of challenges that Iran poses to our interests. The department has organized itself to deal with Iran's ballistic missile capabilities through our preparations, partnerships, force posture, and plans. I am happy to speak today about our missile defense policies, but as you had noted, non-proliferation programs and sanction regimes fall outside of my portfolio, so I will have to defer those questions. As you've been briefed, the JCPOA is a nuclear deal, not a ballistic missile deal. As such, it does not obviate the need for ballistic missile defenses, and it does not change our programs or plans for continued cooperation on missile defense. Iran has the largest inventory of ballistic missiles in the Middle East, and today can strike targets throughout the region and into Eastern Europe. While Iran has not yet developed an intercontinental ballistic missile, its progress on space launch vehicles provides Iran the means to develop longer-range missiles. There is no doubt in my mind that Iran's ballistic missile activities continue to pose a risk to the United States and our allies and partners in Europe, Israel, and the Gulf. However, this is exactly why the United States has maintained a robust missile defense posture throughout the region and why we have focused on missile defense cooperation with these same partners and allies. I also want to reaffirm that the U.S. homeland is currently protected against potential limited ICBM attacks from Iran should they deploy such a capability in the future. We continue to strengthen our homeland defense posture and invest in technologies which better enable us to address emerging threats in the next decade, including continued improvement to the ground-based mid-course defense system and the redesigned kill vehicle for the ground-based interceptor. Secondly, the administration continues to recognize the regional Iranian ballistic missile threat and remains committed to strengthening regional missile defenses. As President Obama stated in Prague on April 5, 2009, and I quote, "Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile activity poses a real threat, not just to the United States, but to Iran's neighbors and our allies. As long as the ballistic missile threat from Iran persists, we will go forward with a missile defense system that is cost-effective and proven." In 2009, we went on to state that the European phased adaptive approach would have the ability to defend all of NATO Europe from Iranian ballistic missiles, and that commitment remains. Outside of NATO, we are working closely, both operationally and on ballistic missile development, counter-ballistic missile development with Israel, and to address the Iranian ballistic missile threat. We are currently co-developing missile defense technology with Israel on Iron Dome, David's Sling, and the Arrow systems. Since 2001, we have provided over $3 billion for missile defense to Israel. As the Secretary also recently noted, with Prime Minister Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Ya'alon, we are full speed ahead on addressing these issues in collaboration with our Israeli counterparts. The Department also continues to implement the deployment of missile defenses that are tailored to the security circumstances in the Middle East with a number of Gulf Cooperation Council states, which I detail in my written statement. During the Secretary's recent discussions with the Saudi Minister of Defense, we reiterated our commitment to working with Gulf countries on missile defense, specifically emphasizing the importance of collective BMD among the GCC countries, the importance of interoperability, and a common intelligence picture. Members of the subcommittee, to conclude, I want to reiterate that regardless of any deal, the Department will continue to improve our homeland defense capabilities against any potential Iranian ballistic missile threat, maintain a robust BMD posture throughout threatened regions, including the Middle East and Europe, and will focus on increasing cooperation with those same partners and allies to deter against and respond to any potential Iranian aggression. I look forward to answering your questions in this session or when necessary in the following closed session. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Almont, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and members of the subcommittee. I thank you for the opportunity to offer testimony today regarding the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, and implications for Iran's missile defense and nonproliferation. Iran continues to be a threat to regional stability as its regime's national interests often diverge with U.S. and our regional allies' security priorities in this dynamic and turbulent region. Understanding Tehran's support to terrorists and subnational armed groups, as well as its military capabilities and regional ambitions, are a priority for DIA's analysts and collectors. For years to come, we expect Iran to be a difficult target. For Iran, its national security strategy remains to ensure the regime's survival, expand its regional influence, and enhance Tehran's military deterrence and regional superiority. Iran's ballistic missile capability will continue to threaten U.S. strategic interests in the Middle East. Iran's overall defense strategy relies on a substantial inventory of theater ballistic missiles capable of striking targets throughout the region. Iran will continue to develop more sophisticated missiles and is improving the range and accuracy of its current missile systems irrespective of JCPOA implementation. Iran publicly stated that it intends to launch a space launch vehicle as early as this year. This vehicle would be capable of intercontinental ballistic missile ranges if configured as an ICBM. Post-JCPOA economic growth could provide Tehran more money for ballistic missile development, but engineering and infrastructure challenges will remain. UN restrictions on ballistic missile-related sales and purchases will remain in place for 8 years following adoption day or until the IAEA reaches its broader conclusion, whichever is sooner. After UN restrictions end, international and domestic tools such as the Missile Technology Control Regime, or MTCR, the Proliferation Security Initiative, and U.S. export controls will still apply, and the U.S. will retain its ability to impose missile-related sanctions under non-nuclear sanctions authorities, including Executive Orders 12938 and 13382. In addition, secondary sanctions will continue to attach to foreign financial institutions and other persons that engage in transactions with Iranian missile proliferators sanctioned by the Department of the Treasury. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for this opportunity to discuss these important topics. I look forward to the subcommittee's questions and a more detailed discussion in the closed session.
Thank you, Mr. Almott. Admiral Searing, you're recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cooper, thank you for the opportunity to be here today and specifically address missile defense-related questions. I will save time and save my comments for the Q&A period. Again, thank you for the invitation.
How you like that, Mr. Cooper? Good. I thought you'd like that, General.
Thank you, Chairman.
No
Rogers.
pressure.
Very quick. Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and members of the subcommittee. I likewise appreciate the opportunity to address your questions regarding the military implications of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The Joint Staff will remain concerned with over all of Iran's destabilizing activities within the region, among which is its expanding ballistic missile inventory and technology that Assistant Secretary Scheer just underlined. To address these concerns, we will preserve the military options at our disposal. We will likewise preserve our posture and engagements with our longstanding partners in the region to assure our mutual security. I look forward to your questions.
All right, thank you. I will recognize myself first. General Klotz, you heard my reference to the DOE and State Department letters that Thornberry and Nunes sent. Do you have anything that you can tell us on the status of our response, when we're going to get a response?
Mr. Chairman, I understand that they are being actively worked within both departments as we speak.
So no. General, let me stay with you just a minute. Is it correct the so-called 1-2-3 agreement between the U.S. and the Emiratis would prohibit possession of uranium enrichment and plutonium reprocessing technology by that country?
I believe that is correct.
Would. Well, is it correct that we've been seeking an agreement of Saudi Arabia for the same so-called gold standard type agreement?
That, sir, I think is something, since it's an ongoing discussion, that we ought to discuss in the closed session, if I could defer to that.
I will do that. Mr. Almott, I may get the same response from you, but are you aware of any information concerning intentions of the UAE or Saudi Arabia regarding their plans to develop uranium enrichment capability?
And I, too, would like to defer until that.
All right. All right. Admiral Searing, are you aware of any discussions post-JPOC of changing the deployment phase, deployment of Phase 3 of the EPAA in Poland?
No, sir, I'm not aware of any changes.
Great. Mr. Scheer, as a senior DOD witness here today, are you able to pledge without hesitation that the administration will make no changes whatsoever to the employment of the Aegis Ashore site in Romania and Poland as consequences of JCPOA?
Currently, that our plan stands as it always has, which is to make those deployments as you have discussed.
Great. Mr. Cooper, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm so looking forward to the classified session. I thought I would do what I could to expedite our movement to 2337, but...
Mr. Lamborn, you're recognized.
Thank you. Well, I do think this is an important issue that has public ramifications as well as secure ramifications that we can talk about in closed session. So I want to talk about some things here openly and in public. that I'm curious about and American people might be curious about. Mr. Scheer, you talked about that with the Israelis and joint missile defense projects that things were, quote, we are full speed ahead. Now, one thing that seems like a disconnect to me is that when it comes to co-production of the Arrow 3 and David Sling, Israel has requested that, but we've made no response that I'm aware of, and the administration provided no budget, no money for it in its budget. Can you address co-production of the Arrow 3 and David Sling?
I will briefly, but then Admiral Searing has that budget under his control, so I'll ask for details from him. But in fact, my understanding is we continue to work together with the Israelis to identify what we need to do in terms of production, co-production, and how much money we work together with in terms of how much we transfer to the Israelis as part of the MDA budget, and that continues to go along based on Secretary Carter's recent visit to Israel as had been planned. So I would ask Admiral Searing, if that's okay, sir, Congressman, to fill in the details on what that cooperation actually looks like.
Okay, but I may come back to you on this.
Sure.
Admiral?
So let me take that. There is ongoing dialogue and negotiations specifically on the David Sling co-production agreement, which is very important for us and very important for Israel. It is weeks away in terms of draft, probably months away in terms of final, but we had great success with the Iron Dome co-production agreement. I expect similar success with David Sling.
Okay, thank you for that information. What about Arrow 3 co-production?
That would follow David Sling, sir. We're focused on David Sling today, as that will be the next system fielded and operationalized.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And back to you, Mr. Scheer. The President requested approximately $155 million for Israeli missile defense in the fiscal year 16 budget request, but Israel's actual needs were approximately $475 million. This seems like a 3-to-1 underfunding to me, only funding 1/3 of what appears to be the actual need. Can you discuss that?
I know that we work very closely with the Israelis to try to figure out what the best funding approach is for our support to their programs and the ones that we do co-production for. The President forwarded to the Congress that the figure that you talked about. We've had, I think, over $3 billion of cooperation up to this point. We have approximately, I think, overall about $500 million in the next fiscal year development plan for cooperation with Israel. And I would say that that is a negotiation to go on between Congress and the White House is what the final number looks like.
Okay, and changing subjects slightly, we've heard from the administration about missile defense integration and interoperability. We've been told that much of this will work through organizations like the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC. However, there seem to be problems that are coming up. In an article called Little Progress Made on Integrated GCC Missile Shield, we see that we haven't even been able to achieve agreement on the establishment of a command and control center, or how it will be operated, or even shared training capabilities and foreign disclosure. This not coming along better.
I don't know the details of the negotiations on those, but what I do know is that based on the Camp David summit, we have re-energized this approach to ensuring that the Gulf Cooperation Council countries are able to work more collaboratively together and with us. I think we've seen greater cooperation in the CAOC in terms of other operations, and my hope is certainly that we will continue that greater collaboration. I know that folks from my team and many others have been out to the Gulf recently to work on the results of the Camp David summit, and we're continuing to follow through. The early warnings and indications piece is the first element of what we're trying to do, and work very closely across the regional and also Missile Defense Agency to make sure that we can get over some of the problems that we may have seen in the past on this issue.
Okay, and then in my remaining little bit of time, Admiral Searing, let me just ask you a general question about the budget. If we have to resort to a continuing resolution for next year's defense, which the House has passed, but the Senate appears unable to pass. What would that do to missile defense in particular that's under your portfolio?
Sir, the two items in particular, it would put pressure on the procurement accounts because that funding would be limited. And more specifically, it would not enable me to begin Poland MILCON construction if the MILCON is tied up in the CR. And I view that as critically important that we have those resources to release, and the Army has the ability to get under contract as soon as possible later in the first part of 2016.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gearman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. It's a big question for Admiral Evan Serling, if you could. Does the Iran deal change your assessment of the East Coast missile defense site?
No, sir.
So
I can expand if you want me to.
Would you please?
Yes, sir. I've testified in front of this committee and others that there certainly is operational benefit to an East Coast field and capacity benefit to an East Coast field, but it's a matter of where does that fit in to the priorities given limited resources on our Homeland Defense system.
And it would not be a priority?
Sir, today in the budget it is a lower priority than in making the GMD program more reliable and more complete in terms of the kill chain.
Okay, so you remain on the same path that it is a low priority and we ought to be spending our money elsewhere. For example, on...
Sir, we are focused on the improvements in the Homeland Defense program, not just in the GBI or the kill vehicle itself, but in the radar that we're adding in Alaska, and all the other improvements that you and I have talked about. We are in this year's budget in PB16, sir, and we are proposing and requesting a shift in directed energy funding in particular.
Shift towards
more directed energy funding, and
we say directed towards directed energy.
Yes, sir. And we ask for everybody's, all four committees' support with that, as we feel it imperative to get on with that development.
And with the East, if the legislation that we pass, NDAA or appropriation, were to force the money into the East Coast defense or the East Coast missile defense site, that would be money that might otherwise be used for directed energy?
Sir, it would come across multiple parts of the missile defense budget. It is not cheap. The cost estimate is $3 to $4 billion over a period of years, and frankly, I don't have that in my budget control today.
And so the other things would be the higher priorities that would be suffering on missile defense if we were to proceed with the East Coast site.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank the gentleman. Chairman recognizes Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of clarification that I was kind of surprised. Mr. Allman, in your testimony, you spoke about the the lifting of the ban on ballistic missile technology to Iran, and you said that words to the effect that whatever is sooner, referencing the IAEA. Did I hear you right, that the IAEA could make an assessment whereby that ban could be lifted early, or did I hear you wrong?
Yeah, in fact, I mean, I think this is, I don't know that there's necessarily an intelligence question. I think that I hate to say this, but I think that this is something that State could answer a little bit better about how the IAEA could reach a broader conclusion. But essentially, I think that there's something in the agreement that allows them to make an agreement, draw a conclusion about Iran's, whether or not Iran is in compliance with the terms of the JCPOA, and that the clock changes in terms of the arms embargo.
Okay, I was not aware of that. So what you're saying is, under what circumstances would the IAEA make that assessment that in fact that date could be accelerated in terms of lifting the ban on ballistic missiles?
That I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question. I think that's something.
Is there somebody here that can answer that question? This is a pretty critical point.
We'd be happy to pursue that in closed session. Could we?
Well, I'd like to know, is there somebody that can answer that question that's here? This is a very critical point.
I can pursue it in closed session.
Okay. Well, I don't understand. Why is that? Why would that be classified?
We can take a look at what specifically is written in the JCPOA in terms of when the various dates, various milestones take place. Mr. Almont is right. There is a provision within the JCPOA for adoption day occurring at 8 years or when the IAEA has made the broader conclusion. When that takes place, that's known as transition day, when that takes place, the UN Security Council can lift the restrictions, its restrictions on ballistic missiles. And there's a whole series of other things which we can detail that would take place at transition day.
Can you point to where that is in the agreement? Is this one of these side agreements, or is this?
No, this is in the agreement itself.
This is in the agreement. Where is that in the agreement?
It's in Annex 5, which is called the Implementation Plan, and it describes in some detail specifically what will happen. On the copy that I have, it's the second page of Annex 5 in the actual JCPOA, sir.
So is this any time within after this? Is it? Can you just tell me? Is it any time after this agreement is implemented that the IAEA then can make that assessment, or is there a threshold in terms of a number of years after the implementation of the agreement that the IAEA is free to make that assessment?
Well, the threshold is a list of a dozen specific things that Iran has to satisfy in terms of the Iraq heavy water research reactor, heavy water production plants, enrichment capability, and so on, which it has to, as I said, it has to implement, and the IAEA has to verify that it has, in fact, implemented each of those steps, which are laid out in great detail in Annex 3 of the JCPOA. Realistically, that's going to take some time. But no, in this specific thing, it's at 8 years or when that broader conclusion is reached by the IAEA, that Iran has met its nuclear-related measures as specified in the JCPOA.
I think the American people need to be, well, Congress certainly needs to know about it. The American people need to be aware of that. I think that's very surprising. Mr. Allman, can you tell me about Iran's biological and chemical weapons capabilities and their ability to weaponize biological and chemical weapons?
If we can wait till the closed session, I can address that, sir.
So that's amazing. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I think everything's pretty much in closed session, and really question the security classifications that are being used that might, in fact, be politically embarrassing, and anything politically embarrassing seems to be classified. I yield back.
Well, as Mr. Almont stated, we could have gotten some answers to some of your questions if the State Department hadn't refused to send a witness to this hearing. Mr. Bridenstine is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am deeply troubled by the Obama administration's last-minute concessions to Iran on lifting the conventional weapons and missile embargoes. In testimony to this committee, the Defense Intelligence Agency stated that, quote, Iran's goal is to develop capabilities that will allow it to build missile-deliverable nuclear weapons, unquote. Lifting these bans makes no sense. Iran's words and actions clearly show its desire, in spite of the deal, to build longer-range and more sophisticated ballistic missiles and proliferate them throughout the region. In February, Iran conducted its 4th successful satellite launch. This one aboard a 2-stage Safir booster. The Safir is based on the Shahab-3, Iran's most advanced ballistic missile. Iran's supposedly peaceful space program is simply a cover for long-range ballistic missile development. Last week, the head of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps publicly announced plans to expand the range of Iran's ballistic missiles. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani declared last week that Iran is, quote, not committed to the restrictions on its missile program, unquote. Israel is Iran's #1 target. While the administration says it's doing everything possible to help protect Israel, the budgetary record tells a different story. And Mr. Scheer, you talked about this when you did your opening statement. I have two charts. Could I get those up on the screen for everybody to see? And then we have handouts as well. Can we get those up on the screen? I was told that we could get those up. Is that a no, Joy? Okay. Well, the charts in front of you illustrate the administration's requested funding for Israeli missile defense versus actual congressional appropriations. Congress consistently appropriates funding much closer to Israeli requirements. The first chart covers funding for all Israeli missile defense programs. The President requested approximately $158 million for Israeli missile defense in the FY16 budget request. The House and Senate defense appropriation bills both would appropriate Israeli missile defense at over $338 million. So it's a comparison of $158 million to $338 million, a figure much closer to Israel's actual need. Secretary Kerry and the President like to tout the administration's support for Israeli missile defense. Yet year after year, the President's budget request ends up much, much lower than congressional appropriations, which are much closer to Israel's needs. Congress always appropriates much closer to what Israel asks us for based on its national security requirements. Mr. Scheer, can you explain this difference?
Congressman, we appropriate with a combination of understanding of what we worked with the government of Israel and also understanding the other requirements for missile defense money that goes to protection of U.S. homeland and articulation of U.S. systems and U.S. programs. And the President's recommendation then gets forwarded to Congress, and then we implement the funding that is eventually agreed to by Congress and signed out by the President.
So when the President sends his budget request, it's now up on the screen, I think everybody can see it. Year after year, the President's budget request is far below what Israel asks for. And of course, Israel is very concerned because now there's this agreement with Iran. And it's also far below what Congress would like. Is that going to change?
Right now, it obviously did not change for this year. I'm not willing, I don't know the answer to follow-on years.
Okay. Let's go to the next chart, please. I have particular interest in David Sling as the co-author of David Sling Authorization Act. The President requested approximately $225 million from FY11 to FY16 for David Sling. Over the same time, according to the government of Israel, with which this committee agreed, the actual requirement was $770 million. The administration underfunded the requirement by 1/3. Mr. Scheer, can we expect this underfunding for David Sling to continue under the Iran deal? Is this what the administration means by support of Israel?
We will continue to look at how we can better cooperate on David Sling. Admiral Searing mentioned this previously. I'm happy to encourage if there are any more details, but that is a newer program, and hence the figures and the viability of those specific figures changes as we look through.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time is expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Chairman Turner, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Klotz, I'd like to talk to you, as our chairman has, about 1, 2, 3 agreements and nations who have agreements with the United States that may or may not be at risk. I know that whenever we have an open session and a closed session, there's always this sensitivity between the issue of what's open and what's closed. So I want to ask you a question about about that line, right? So if the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, picked up the phone and called Secretary Kerry and said, we affirm our requirements and our agreements with the United States and our 1, 2, 3 agreements, and we will not pursue any uranium enrichment, we could discuss that openly, right? Because it's just affirming an ongoing commitment that is there that we all know is public.
Yes, the 123 agreement with United Arab Emirates is public.
But the affirmation of it, the fact that the UAE has no intention of reevaluating it, that there's no discussion about pursuing uranium enrichment, that there's no concern about the agreement as a result of the agreement with Iran, if all that was affirming, you'd be able to discuss that in this meeting, right? Because it's all the status quo.
You know, I don't really know the answer to that, Congressman, because I'm having a little difficulty following the question.
Let me help you.
I suspect it would depend on how that was communicated to the United States. If it was made public by a member state, what its intentions were, that would be something which I would assume we could discuss. If it was something that was passed on in confidential
Well, let me help you.
Yeah.
There's also prohibitions against lying to Congress. Do you have any information that a nation such as United Arab Emirates has contacted the United States and indicated that they intend to walk away from their 123 agreement obligations that restrict uranium enrichment?
I have no knowledge of that.
No one has informed you from the administration or from any other agency that they have information of that?
Not me personally.
So you have had no discussions with anyone that anyone has related to you of their awareness or information of a concern of 123 agreement and the United Arab Emirates and their issues with respect to uranium enrichment?
To the best of my knowledge, no, that has not been a subject. I am aware of what the UAE 123 agreement is in a general sense, but I have not been involved in any specific discussions on that subject.
I'm troubled by your word specific. Have you had unspecific discussions?
Congressman, I have not had any discussions or any special briefings on a UAE 123 agreement.
Okay.
I am aware of it because it is one of the 123 agreements that the United States has with other nations, and I have read a lot in the press and in other documents about that particular agreement, but not about the specific issue that you raised.
Okay, well, you would certainly understand our concern because as Congress takes up the issue of the Iranian agreement, Secretary Kerry has made absolute statements to Congress that there is no one in the Middle East who will change their obligations with respect to nonproliferation or their relationship with the United States with respect to uranium enrichment. And certainly, if anyone had information that was other than how the Secretary of State has represented it, it should be known by decision makers because they're not just voting on the issue of Iran, they're voting on nuclear programs by Iran and their neighbors. You can see why that would be a level of concern.
I understand your point, Congressman.
Excellent. Well, we are going into closed session, and I know you've availed yourself of the issue of closed session. I'm very concerned about the issue of as we look to the IAEA and the portions of the document that are secret, with the IAEA's relationships and deals with Iran concerning inspections. Do you have information that you're going to be able to provide us in the closed session concerning the secret agreement that we've not seen?
I'm willing to discuss what we know about that particular issue in the closed session.
Do you have details?
I have information which we can discuss in the closed session.
Have you seen that agreement?
I have not seen that agreement.
Okay, that would be fairly consistent with what everyone else has done. But yet we have people who are willing to vote in favor of an agreement that includes secret provisions that no one has seen and you have not either. I yield back.
I think, Chairman, we can't get into the skiff for 10 more minutes, so I'm going to let Mr. Lamborn ask one more question, and I'm going to ask one more.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me for asking one more question. And I'll start with Admiral Searing and General Shepro. And my purpose isn't to put you on the spot. My purpose is to get your best judgment, because this is such an important issue that we're voting on. It's historic. Were you, either of you, consulted before the negotiators, whether it was the Secretary or the President, agreed to drop the ballistic missile embargo on Iran as part of the JCPOA? Were either of you consulted about that?
No, sir.
No, sir.
And that's what I guess that's what I assumed. Had you been, what concerns would you two have shared to whoever asked you?
Sir, I'll take that first. You know, my focus in missile defense against Iran is unchanged by the agreement. That we remained entirely focused on their rapid escalation of capability and capacity over the last several years. And we made absolutely the right decision to focus on regional defense for that potential escalation. And I can tell you that my job is to be pessimistic, not optimistic. And everything we do at the agency is planning for that capability to increase and that capacity to increase at the rate it has. And as far as I'm concerned, and I've read the agreement, we remain focused on that very mission.
General?
So I represent the chairman, and as he has said on the Hill before, this agreement addresses one point of friction with Iran.
Excuse me?
This agreement addresses one point of friction with Iran, the nuclear arena, and that we must keep pressure on the other malign activities. And so, as Chairman Rogers has cited in the beginning, I agree with the chairman that we must continue to keep pressure on this area of development of ballistic missiles.
And I'll just make a comment. It was a nuclear agreement, but we all of a sudden see arms embargo lifted and ballistic missile embargo lifted, which are non-nuclear issues. I mean, there were enough concessions already, but then to add those on top of it really staggers me. General, don't you have a concern about the ballistic missile embargo being lifted?
Again, I'll cite Chairman Dempsey's previous statements that in a perfect world, the embargo would remain, but as it is, we remain concerned about this, and we must continue to keep pressure on this area.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, I recognize Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Klotz and the Vice Admiral, with respect to budgets and allocations for missile defense, is it fair to say with sequestration technically kicking back in October that would also affect the support that we could offer for missile defense for our allies, in addition to a continuing resolution that could also offer reduced support and aid? Is that fair to say as well?
Well, sir, I don't deal with missile defense in the National Nuclear Security Administration, but let me just say, since you've created an opportunity to do that, that there are a number of very, very important programs that are underway within the Department of Energy and National Nuclear Security Administration, which apply to maintaining a safe, secure, and effective nuclear arsenal and posturing ourselves for the future that would be severely affected by sequestration or budget caps and without any relief from that.
And sir, from missile defense, and I'll just talk to your specific concerns on the CR, that certainly procurement account pressure would happen under the CR, but my more specific concern earlier was the potential impact on the MILCON for Poland and EPA Phase 3, which gets to your point on exactly what are we doing with our allies and would it affect that? So the answer would be yes. And then for sequestration, I've testified in front of this committee and others that sequestration at the levels that are being considered would be catastrophic to what we've proposed with the improvements that must be made for Homeland Defense and the regional defense systems. In particular, the redesigned kill vehicle and the new radar would be at risk, and I've testified before that I view that as overmatching. If those improvements aren't made, our system could be overmatched by 2020.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair is informed that Mr. Turner has one more question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Klotz, just one more addition. I would recommend that you do pick up the phone and call the Secretary of State and ask him if there's anything additional information that he should provide to you that's inconsistent with your statements today, or and if there's any information he needs to update you on.
Well, I'll see if he'll take my call. I doubt if an undersecretary from the Department of Energy would necessarily get through on the first try.
The effort, since you put such a admirable effort forward here, it would probably be helpful and interesting.
Thank you for the suggestion, Congressman.
General Shepro, representing obviously the Joint Staff, and Admiral Searing has said an answer on the East Coast Missile Defense site, of which I'm an advocate for, that I don't criticize in any respect. I think the Admiral has articulated both a need and a desirableness for an East Coast missile defense site, but has recognized the fiscal constraints under which he's under and has, identified that as a problem for executing an East Coast missile defense site. But even though I'm an advocate for the East Coast Missile Defense Site, I'm obviously not the initiator of the East Coast Missile Defense Site. We always, here on the Armed Services Committee, look to the experts, those in the military, as to what their needs are when we, as the Admiral has so greatly articulated, try to allocate resources. And General, perhaps you could give us an articulation on the issue of our response to NORTHCOM. NORTHCOM continues to include in its integrated priority list the need for an additional interceptor site, a third site in the United States for the defense of the homeland. We didn't make this up. We're just agreeing that there is the need, which I think Admiral Searing has recognized the need and the benefits of a third site. And in that, it's our intent to try to respond to it in allocating resources. We're the ones who obviously have to pick where those resources come from. We're not telling the Admiral, we're going to do this and you have to go take it from your existing programs. It's something that we have to find the money for. Could you articulate that NORTHCOM has continued to identify it on the integrated priority list? That still sounds pretty important, isn't it?
Yes, sir, important, yes, but if you want to listen to the expert, I have to defer to Admiral Searing because of yes.
Admiral?
Mr. Turner, thank you. It has showed up in their priority list, and I would just cite, sir, that it's a priority list in terms of there are many other requirements in that list that we're addressing, and we can go through that in detail in terms of funding allocated to both NORTHCOM and STRATCOM's priority list.
Well, what I was looking for, and I understand your prior answer, Admiral, of the allocation of resources and priorities. But I wanted your answer, or actually either of your answers, on the issue of need. I mean, since it's showing up on the integrated priority list, it's a need. Could you describe the need?
The need or the benefit is operational and capacity.
And what would that be?
It would allow more interceptors, which is always better in terms of the warfighter, and it would allow more decision space, as both combatant commanders have testified to.
Now, explain decision space.
Decision space in terms of a potential threat from Iran and ICBM in particular, and what that would provide in terms of interceptor flyout time and future assessment capability, and I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I got a minute and a half. I would like you not to leave it at that. Okay, so additional time and interceptors. Obviously, proximity is one, right? East Coast is closer than Alaska, where the other missiles might be coming from.
Geographically.
Correct. And you said additional decision-making. Well, that would also be an issue of what we have referred to as, and you have referred to as, look, see, shoot, look, shoot, right?
Yes, sir.
You'd be able to apply an asset to an incoming asset, have an opportunity to assess whether or not the United States, hundreds of thousands of Americans at risk, require an additional a shot, correct?
Yes, sir.
So that's what you're talking about, the ability to shoot twice, the ability to try to take something out of the sky, the ability to eliminate a threat to mainland United States.
Sir, I would just qualify that by having a first shot opportunity sooner.
Thank you for elaborating. That's all.
I think that's it. Before we do go in the closed session, though, Mr. Almond, I did want to ask you something I think you can answer in the open session. In your prepared statement, you cite Iranian claims that it will launch a space launch vehicle as early as this year, and you also stated this vehicle will be capable of intercontinental ballistic missile ranges if configured as an ICBM. Didn't they just test that earlier this year?
They did test on the 2nd of September, I believe, and they've announced that they're going to attempt another launch of that same system sometime in the near future.
All right, we are going to recess until we're going to adjourn and then reconvene in 23:37 in about 5 minutes. We're in adjournment.